interrupt you just now. Thank you.
So this topic of today is also the background of a position paper of the European Network of Research Ethics Committees, EUREC, which we published in March this year. And let me start with a brief description of the background of our position paper and the status quo. So, I mean, as you all know, a system of ethical review of research projects plays a significant role in modern research for many decades. And against the background of research participants being abused for research purposes in the past, the review by research ethics committees has been introduced to protect human research participants in medical studies from harm. And therefore, independent RECs support scientific and technological innovations involving human participants in the research and development phase by reviewing research projects from the perspective of scientific soundness, because the methodology has also to do with ethics, ethical justifiability, and compliance with the legal requirements. So in line with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, it's agreed that human dignity in particular must be protected in any scientific and technological development, not only in medicine. However, research ethics committees do not only help to protect human participants in research from risks, but also protect researchers themselves through this consultative project. At least is an ideal. EUREC feels particularly committed to this process that is established especially in medical research. However, based on the experience of many inquiries we currently receive at the EUREC office from researchers, research institutions, and members of research ethics committees, we need to pay particular attention to four central observations. First, more and more ethics reviews are being requested by research funding bodies, scientific journals, even outside the field of medicine, where they are not legally required. And second, there are only a few research ethics committees established outside medicine for the ethics review of research, most likely in disciplines like psychology, sociology, less often in technical disciplines. At my university, for example, one project could not be conducted because of the lack of existing of an ethics committee. So they skipped it. When such research ethics committees are established outside biomedical research, however, the national structures for a joint exchange of these research ethics committees are unfortunately often lacking, because every research institution has its own deal here. And fourth, the demands on researchers to reflect ethically on their own research have grown more and more in recent years. I come back to this important issue. But researchers often do not know who to contact. So we in EUREC serves often as a kind of clearinghouse here, in particular when it comes to research between different kind of European countries where the regulations are different. So the reasons why we are being asked these questions about extended forms of an ethics review is that society's sensitivity to ethical questions in the research process has grown. And this means that it's not only about social debates and political processes on the topic, that is more the responsibility of national ethics councils, but also about an ethically sensitive research process itself. In addition, people have become aware that not only physical interventions in the human body, as in medical studies, can cause harm, but also other methods, such as interviews with sensitive questions or the unauthorized use of personal data. But whether ethical reviews help and are a solution here, it's not self-evident. So researchers also have critical views on it. This on the left is a quote of a book by Israel and Hay from 2006. So some researchers in the humanities react very angry and frustrated concerning this aspect. They believe their work is being constrained and distorted by regulators of ethical practice who do not necessarily understood social science research and its methods. In the regulators are acting on the basis of biomedically driven arrangements that make little or no sense to social scientists. Even researchers who are generally in favor of institutionalized review procedures and actively participate in them indicate weaknesses in everyday procedures, such as incompetent, contradictory, and poor coordinated feedbacks and requirements. So it's noticeable here that in most cases, it's not fundamentally the issue of research ethics or the protection of participating persons needs closeness, intimacy, which require the establishment of a relationship of trust between the researcher and the research participants. Research perspective. And against this background, the willingness to reflect on questions of research ethics is not only great, but part of everyday business. But can Rex really help here? Many researchers would like more exchange and orientation, especially on new research ethics issues that arise from, for example, in connection with digital technologies, social media, the internet, and the research situation there. However, there are major reservations about the establishment of ethics committees here, as there are fears that these procedures will be one side orientated towards quantitative criteria, legal discourse, and bureaucratic logics. And that means when we establish those type of systems, we need much more link it to the real needs of a specific research disciplines. So de facto, this would amount to limiting qualitative research and knowledge generation, not because it's unethical, but because processes and formats are expected that they are inappropriate for the methods, theories, and research situations of qualitative research. Therefore, ethics committees and the review process in general need to be able to develop procedures that respond appropriately to the diversity of methods in the humanities. And they also need to consider how a proper informed consent might look like related to these methods, because that's very different compared to the biomedical sciences. So products of research change our entire world more and more profoundly in a positive way, but sometimes also with negative side effects for society, human nature, the natural world around us. And therefore, research can only be conducted in an ethically sensitive and responsible way in science and the humanities. And in this context, ethical reflection is not only required at the application stage of a technology or a system, but already at the research and development stage. And moreover, due to the worldwide interconnection of research institutions, The changes encounter different social contexts and value systems in a globalized world. So an internationally well-organized ethics review system may also help to fight against ethics dumping in research. We, for example, have a lot of connections with African countries where also humanities do research concerning behavior, economics, etc. And it is important to have this international exchange here because the perspective is so different on the life world of the different cultures. A particular challenge of many disciplines is the use of personal data, and we have clearly seen this in the pandemic. A lot of data, also personal data, are needed for the development of vaccines, for model simulations of the spread of the virus, or when it comes to the development of tracking apps of infected or endangered persons. And also in behavioral studies or economic studies, how do people behave in the pandemic? And what does that mean for our society and our quality of life? In other words, data protection becomes a major challenge in many types of research, especially when personal data is transferred outside the European Union. And this is a severe issue of those disciplines of the humanities that work with certain empirical methods, but also qualitative interviews contain sensitive data. However, the ethical questions posed to research do not only concern the immediate protection of research participants, but also broader responsibility of researchers as formulated, for example, in the Code of Conduct of the All European Academies, the ALEA, where the fourth ethical principle, which is quoted here on the slide, states respect for colleagues, respect for research participants, society, ecosystems, cultural heritage, and the environment. My God, what a realm of responsibility. So, in other words, it's about a stronger normative interaction between science and society, which under the keyword open science also demands a stronger opening on the part of the science towards society. And this development shows the need for ethics consultation or a kind of ethics dialogue, maybe an ethics review, also in non-biomedical disciplines, including the humanities. The European Commission established an ethics review system, as you all know, in its funding framework programs already for many years, also now in Horizon Europe. However, when looking on the European map, ethics reviews outside of medical research look very heterogeneous at the member state level. Researchers conducting non-medical studies within the legal framework of their countries are in some cases not bound by specific regulations as they are in force for medical research, and often ethics reviews for such studies is not required by national laws or by professional laws or guidelines. Although funding agencies and scientific journals increasingly require ethics review for all studies involving human research participants, in some jurisdictions, it's often difficult for the researchers to find an ethics committee that will take the responsibility for advising them or reviewing the projects. There are countries and research institutions where medical ethics committees share the task. I'm not very much in favor of this type of conducting this issue, but there are also ethics committees at various faculties in some universities. Sometimes we see central ethics committees at the level of the university or the research institutions, and in some smaller countries there are central ethics committees for research outside biomedicine on the national level. So fact is, the practice is very different in Europe. And consequently, there is a great need to exchange experience on the topic of ethics review beyond biomedical research and to harmonize a bit the procedures between the member states, but also between ethics review at the level of the European Commission on the one hand, and those what the on the other hand. Therefore, position to contribute to the increasing importance of ethics review of research projects in the humanities and in general outside of biomedical research. This is to harmonize the system in Europe and also to encourage policymakers and research institutions to pay more attention to this issue. So EUREC wants to serve as a kind of platform to ensure that these developments promote dialogue within ethics. Above all, these considerations should not hinder research or create undue bureaucratic burdens. Moreover, ethics committees should by no means patronize researchers, but should sharpen their own ethical reflection. It's important from an ethical perspective that research is free and remains free. So research may only be restricted on the basis of other fundamental rights. So my last point is that in ENERI, which is the European Network of Research Ethics and Research Integrity, where EUREC is a part, we have therefore developed a decision key, what we call a decision tree for researchers and members of research ethics committees. It's an internet tool to support them in developing the right ethical questions for research projects and their evaluation. So it includes ethical aspects of many research disciplines, and EUREC wants to continue this by extending and improving this decision tree next year, in particular in the field of the humanity. And this is the background why EUREC wants to include more members from non-medical RECs and promote exchange on their experiences. So the topics will be, of course, different in the various areas. It's not so easy to integrate others than medical RECs into the whole system. But what we're trying to do here with decision tree is that we help to raise the right question for the specific research topics. So my hope is that we will be able to meet these challenges in the future, also with help of our networking processes, with ENERI as the larger network, the Embassy of Good Science, which is the platform where projects could represent themselves, where is a community of exchange, and EUREC is a central partner and contributor here. And I hope that in the future we can very much promote this exchange between the ethics research in the humanities and the ethics research in the science, biomedical science. I think there's a great project for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this, for setting the tone, actually, very much setting the tone, walking us through the origins of how we are where we are today, and also the skepticisms that we come across in these areas. So thank you very much for this. I think we will take this up in the discussion once all the our panelists have presented also their opinions. I'm very pleased now to introduce Mats, can I also use your first name only? Thank you. So Dr. Mats Sorensen, who's a senior researcher at the Danish Center for Studies in Research and Research Policy at Aarhus University. And he is a coordinator of the project called Standard Operating Procedures for Research Integrity. Mats, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, if my slides are working?
They're not in presentation mode yet.
They're not in presentation mode. They are on my screen, but that's kind of, maybe they
yes,
work
now it is.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. I think one would have thought that I had learned after 2 years in this pandemic, but there's still things to be learned. Okay, so I am going to talk about, so when I got this invitation, and thank you very much for inviting me to this day and to this webinar, I revisited yesterday and this morning 2 focus group studies that I have taken part in and that I have led, 2 quite big focus group studies to see what we could learn from those studies on the subjects that we're discussing here. So ethics and data protection within the humanities. So the first study I'm going to talk about, and this will of course be a very brief overflying of some of the results that fit to the subjects we are discussing here today. It's a study that we did that I did together with my colleague Tina Ravn in the Danish print project, where we looked at practices, perceptions, and patterns of research integrity. We did 22 focus group interviews, and 5 of them were within the humanities, where we tried to understand, get a deep understanding of questionable research practices within all the main areas. We operate with 5 main areas of research, but here I'll only talk about the humanities. So. We did a lot of things in the interviews, and one of the things we did was a card exercise where we asked them to sort cards, sort different practices according to questionable research practices, according to how severe they were and how widespread they were within their areas. As a part of this exercise, we also asked them to think about examples within their own fields of research, examples of questionable research practices, and write them down. You can see to the left here some of the cards, the many cards they wrote. Here we have then ordered the cards from the humanities. You see this is from the humanities within this 5 sort of overall phases within a research process. And you can see there are many different questionable research practices that they just from the top of their mind when we were doing this exercise thought about. Unoriginality in the ID generation phase, and if we look at things we are talking about here, so in the data collection phase, they also talked about inadequate data management and data storage, and they talked about breaches of ethical principles, for example, in the way they treated human participants. So they were some of the examples they come up with. Some were mentioned by many participants, and some were only mentioned by a few. 2 main findings from this study that are worth mentioning, I think, in this discussion is that the humanities points to point towards similar and different QRPs in comparison with other main areas of science. And I think that's a key point, that the humanities is both something similar and different to the other main areas. But also when we look at the humanities, it's not just it's not a one entity. There are different ways of producing knowledge also within the humanities. So the humanities are many different things when it comes to QRPs, but also when it comes to good research practices. So I think this is worth keeping in mind in our discussion. And this slide here illustrates this. This is the same one I showed you before with the humanities up here. And down here you have the medical sciences, the QRPs that they mentioned. All the ones that are not highlighted are not the same across the two main areas of research here. So most of them were not mentioned in the two groups. Some of them cherry-picking sources of data were mentioned in across the two groups. Also selective citing in slightly different ways, but still was mentioned. So this testifies to what I said before, that there are differences between the main areas of research, but that there are also similarities. But there's also another thing that is interesting here. You see p-hacking up here in the humanities and p-hacking here in medical science. Something you wouldn't think you would find perhaps in the humanities. P-hacking has to do with statistical methods, and with something that you would normally find within medical science, quantitative social science, but you can also find it within the humanities. And here we found that it was a person or a couple of persons within who are doing social linguistic, who also use the statistical methods. So it's just to say that the humanities are many different things and have different needs for support. And this is what we looked at in another focus group study, big focus group study that is part of the SOPs for RI project, Standard Operating Procedures for Research Integrity. Here we did 30 focus group interviews across 8 countries and across the 4 main areas of research. 7 of these interviews were focused on the humanities. And this is my last slide here. So where you can see there's just some key lessons that we learned from this in relation to the discussion we have today, that we need to be aware of variances in experiences and needs of the different disciplinary subfields within humanities. This was also what Dirk was talking about before. There are many different ways of doing research in the humanities. Different disciplinary fields within the humanities across the humanities and compared to the others, but also within the humanities. Differences in the way research is done and differences in the way in what is considered to be good research practices. So you could speak of different epistemic cultures like Knorr Cetina does. Differences show themselves in differences when it comes to need for support and guidelines. And this is something that is very, very important to think about. As one researcher says here, we are always held to standards that have nothing to do with our practice. And when that happens, when researchers feel that they are not that the standards they have to live up to, the guidelines that they are provided from their institutions or from funders, that they are not really taking their actual research practice into consideration, then they feel they are illegitimate, and they see them as a burden, as additional paperwork, as unnecessary bureaucracy, and you kind of lose the researchers there. So this is really, really important to think about. And let me end with an example of how different. So this is within the humanities both example, how different researchers think about ethics. So this is just ethics. I could have taken other examples as well, but here to some researchers within the humanities, ethics is fundamental for many researchers. Of course, one says, I mean, it's such a crucial but basic thing. I think that's it. That it's having a framework in place that is ethical. He or she says. Whereas another one says that it doesn't play that big of a role because the actors I look at, they're all dead. So, and this is a guy from archaeology. So this is just one small example of the huge differences we find within the humanities, and something we have to bear in mind when we want to help them with guidelines and when we make standards when it comes to ethics and data practices within the humanities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mats, for this reflection, sharing with us. Also, I have to say, I always focus on how different we are. So your point on, hold on, there are also similarities, and that there is more also to learn from each other, from the similarities, I found very inspiring. Thank you. Of course, also the differences and reflections on the nuances of the differences. Esther, Esther comes also from our university, so you see already that I'm on first name without asking here. Esther Horn is a lawyer with a very broad range of research issues at our university. She has received a Comenius Senior Fellowship funding for preparing e-learning materials for privacy in research. And this is what she will be sharing with us this afternoon. Esther, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really interesting also for me to hear your perspectives. I'm also a member of the Legal and Ethical Board of Clarin, which is a European research infrastructure. And I thought it would be nice to start with an example of the DELAT community. That is a community within Clarin for research on distorted speech. And they realized that they really want to share resources, video and audio material of vulnerable groups, and they cannot make the data open. And spring we did a DPIA role play we developed in the Comenius project with them online, and they really liked it. And later on they made their own scenario, and we recorded the scenario, and one of the participants was from Ireland and a member of an ethics board there, and she said, I was always afraid for the legal stuff, but now I understand that this impact assessment is an approach that can help to jointly address the issues that are really relevant for us. And that was really nice. And there was also a data manager from the repository that archives the data set. And he said, yeah, everyone now talks about we need encryption as one central measure appropriate measure, but that cannot be done for our kind of data. And through this method of a data protection impact assessment, we could clarify that this need to be appropriate measures related to the research scenario. So this was good news. And what I would like to do now is show you the materials we developed for students and why we choose this data protection impact assessment as a method to develop this teaching material and show you some experiences with the role play. What we developed already early on is a film about a researcher with a student with innovative ideas about using it with a school, and then he bumps into a legal friend, and this friend says, yes, but did you think about the rights of the data subjects? And he's a bit grumpy because his research is so interesting. Later on, he starts to understand things. He bumps into a friend that has a technical background, and he understands a bit more about technical measures, and so on. We made e-learning material, and that's freely available. But when we had the opportunity to get funding from the Comenius Fellowship, we thought it would be really cool to make a role play in which all these different perspectives can really come together in a structured way, and students can work on real cases. So we developed several scenarios for research, covert research with minors, for research on developing algorithms with Parkinson patients. And we developed learning communities because that's really important, that it is a team effort. And we developed a teacher manual for if you want to do this role play with your students. Learning outcomes. So I focus on the GDPR, but you can somehow see it will fit in research ethics and integrity education as well. We have experience with that. And the learning outcomes we designed because often the staff who teaches in that kind of courses acts on the legal side of things. So here we can make them understand that this good practices are important, standards are important, communication with other stakeholders is important, and documentation is important to be able to share the result of the assessment broader. What is a data protection impact assessment? Maybe you're familiar with the concept, most likely. It's everyone knows the environmental impact assessment, and even before the GDPR in Canada, and Kavukian developed a privacy impact assessment, a holistic approach to address privacy issues from the perspective of the data subject, and include all the principles that are relevant for data protection. So this method can be recognized in not only in the GDPR but also in other approaches. There's now even something as a human rights impact assessment, an artificial intelligence impact assessment. They all have this idea of privacy by design, ethics by design, a proactive approach to systematically think ahead of the relevant questions. And we were inspired very much by a German approach where they have developed a method that is a multi-stakeholder approach. not just, but really an approach to bring all stakeholders together. There's a very nice practical guide available, published by Fraunhofer, and I think that's really relevant, because on the one hand, ethics and isn't something you really need to provide as a researcher yourself. It is also stressed in the guidance document issued by for Horizon Europe, that safeguarding data subjects' rights that is the responsibility of the investigators, cannot be outsourced, yet it is a shared responsibility within a university that has to has duties of care to enable responsible data management, and is now very much under pressure of funders that stimulate open science, and that entails high risks as well, because of risks of re-identification. So we need a positive, proactive approach to discuss risks and dilemmas also related to open science. What I think the DPIA method could bring is a design of appropriate measures and the importance of collaboration, a process to document measures, which is also makes it possible to decide a report with peers. And this is also mentioned by the European Data Protection Board, that for a specific high-risk processing scenario, you can make a reference DPIA report and use that as a base to design a code of conduct. And I hope that this idea in the future will be uptaken. An example, together with Catherine Jasserin, a well-known scholar in the field of facial and speech recognition, we developed a scenario based on PhD research within our university about Parkinson's disease. The finding here is that you can hear in a speech of a person that he is going to get Parkinson, and an algorithm was developed for that. And we developed a case where we said, okay, this algorithm can also be used for an insurance company. So they had to think, the students had to think about their responsibility also as a developer of the algorithm. And they also had to understand other regulation apart from data protection regulation. We developed key concept cards, 20 cards, freely available on the website of the key issues of the GDPR. We developed role-playing cards where 8 roles, like a member of an ethics board, a supervisor, legal expert, data manager, all these roles are present. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
No, okay. So this is an impression before Corona. During Corona, we did a similar thing with graduate students in breakout rooms based on scenarios related to COVID research. And the way this German model works is that for protection goals, this is simplified and understandable for lay persons. That there are protection goals that have to do with security. There are also protection goals that have to do with purpose limitation, rights of data subjects, and transparency. And for all these goals, measures can be designed, and they sometimes need to be balanced against each other. So this is a feasible approach, and in conclusion, we hope it will be uptaken to train next generation of researchers with a holistic approach, and that it will help to harmonize discussions on the internal responsibility of an institution and ethical standards in a research field. I think this is what I wanted to say, and materials are available with a Creative Commons license. If you're interested to know more about it, please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for this presentation of how you're trying to bring privacy and data protection on the sort of on the spectrum of young researchers. Thank you. Rock, thank you for now being our next speaker. Rock Benson is a research fellow at the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts at the Institute of Philosophy. He also, his institution is part of the GRACE project, and they have been trying to build a research ethics integrity framework at the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. So this is very now, what are the challenges that have been envisaged, or rather have been faced as the process went along? Rock, you have the floor and the slides are up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. So I will present, just a moment. Thank you. So I will present the activities related to research ethics and integrity we have done at the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts in the framework of the GRACE project as an implementing organization. So hopefully some of these things, some of the things we have done and learned along the way can be useful also in other contexts related to research ethics and the humanities in particular. Our research center, the ZRSU, is a leading research performing organization in Slovenia, comprised of 18 research institutes that cover a range of disciplines, mainly in humanities and social sciences, but also some in natural sciences. We took our involvement in the GRACE project as an opportunity to prepare the groundwork for establishing research ethics and integrity support mechanisms in our organization. Our main aim was to develop an ethics and integrity policy that we would then implement. The initial context for this intention was that the researchers at ZRSU have until now mostly been self-reliant when it comes to ethics and integrity, following general standards that apply in their disciplines. In Slovenia, and we are not an exception here, as both Dirk and Mats were explaining earlier, research ethics is institutionally very developed in biomedical sciences, where the National Ethics Committee reviews all medical research, but there is no comparable national structure in non-medical fields, where most of the research at ZRSU is carried out. So often, social science and humanities research in Slovenia does not require an ethics committee clearance to get national funding. Also, there is currently no national framework for research integrity. And of course, these are all factors that were also involved in the absence of ethics and integrity support mechanisms at our own organization. Yet, in the face of increasing scrutiny, rising awareness, and new regulations, ZRC SAZU has decided to implement guidance and support mechanisms to help its researchers navigate ethics and integrity dilemmas. So anticipating potential obstacles, and these are exactly the same obstacles as Dirk was explaining in his own presentation. So anticipating these obstacles, our guiding principle from the start was to implement the policy in a participatory manner, including researchers in the process. So we wanted to avoid establishing something purely from the top down, something that could be seen as imposed on the researchers from the outside. As is well known, ethics reviews and integrity trainings can be perceived by researchers as empty box ticking exercises that additionally burden their workload. And in humanities and social sciences, as Dirk explained, this is all the more often that we get this kind of a reaction. So this is why we decided to first organize a discussion process to be able to understand what kind of issues researchers actually face in their everyday practice, and so to be able to develop the policy around these issues as a response to these issues. So we prepared a survey that reached a larger share of our researchers, but also organized discussion events where researchers discussed the same issues in a more direct and detailed way. Primarily, we wanted to use this process itself to start an institutional level bottom-up debate on ethics and integrity issues. But also, of course, we wanted to gain knowledge on the needs and expectations researchers have regarding potential support mechanisms to be implemented at our organization. So what we wanted to find out first was, what are the ethical dilemmas researchers face? So what are the ethical issues they really feel are difficult, but also important to address? So issues that they would want to discuss in more detail and also to have some guidance on. Second, we wanted to know what kind of ethics review processes our researchers face. And we learned that while 74% of researchers regularly undertake projects that raise ethical issues, only 39 have gone through an ethics review procedure. We have also learned that those whose research actually requires ethics approval, either to get funding or to get an article published, outsource ethical reviews to committees at other institutions in Slovenia, and they would generally very much welcome an in-house ethics committee. So these two questions enabled us to understand what are the needs to which an ethics and integrity policy should actually correspond. But we also wanted to know what are the expectations regarding the policy to be developed, regarding the mechanisms and protocols to be established. So what we found was that most researchers would welcome an ethics and integrity committee that would especially provide support, guidance, advice, and also the option to have their projects assessed or reviewed. But also the majority of the researchers would support an advisory kind of committee, which means that not one that would impose obligatory forms of review. So they would prefer ethics review to be optional, not some kind of a necessary obligation for all kinds of projects. It is also important to researchers, and this was also addressed by Professor Sørensen before, it is very important to them that guidelines and review protocols would be developed with respect to the differences between disciplines, so that specifics of their research work would be acknowledged rather than providing guidelines that would be too generic to be usable, or review principles that would be too uniform to account for the specific issues raised by a certain kind of research. So we thus decided to establish a committee that would take on these roles. And also when this whole process was taking place, there was also a convergence between our ethics and integrity efforts and the efforts made by ZRC SAZU in the context of other RRI projects related to equal opportunities and gender equality. So so the gender initiative working on this project was also establishing their own committee. So we decided to merge this committee so that it would be a committee for ethics, integrity, and equal opportunities in research. And we thought it would be productive to combine these efforts with the view to a more integrated RRI approach, while still, of course, having specialized members for each of these domains. So based on the findings of this process, the policy document was drafted in consultation with ZRC SAZU management, the legal department, the GDPR officer, our publishing house, and also the researchers who participated in the discussion process. And this policy has now been made official, and through this policy, ZRC SAZU commits to establishing this advisory committee. And what this committee will do, it will do ethics review, provide advice and support, develop guidelines, misconduct protocols, organize awareness events, discussions, and so on. And the document, of course, also lays out a timeline for implementing the policy, distribution of responsibilities, and such things. And now, of course, we are entering the implementation phase, and we feel that somehow we have ensured early buy-in from researchers, and also we feel confident that we have management commitment. So we are looking forward to this implementation. However, of course, there are also some challenges that we need to prepare for. Of course, we still have to appoint members and define the ethics review processes. We have to be careful to secure long-term resources and also to develop the expertise of members. And also to keep engaging researchers to participate in the discussions, in developing guidelines, etc. And of course, we also need to be open to their feedback. And also, just to add one final note, the same group of researchers that developed this policy is now also leading a national project funded by the Slovenian Research Agency that will carry out an analysis of the state-of-the-art of ethics, integrity, and gender policies and practices in the Slovenian research system. And it is our task in that project to also develop guidelines on a national level. Thank you.
Thank you, Rock, very much for this reality from the ground aspect. So thank you, and very congratulations on having achieved this policy. It's a very nice achievement. May I open the floor for questions? We have a few minutes for questions. You could either put a question in the chat or also take the floor to ask your question. In this online environment, it's always a bit strange when you don't really know whether anybody is going to write the question or not yet. But if I may, I had one curiosity question for Dirk, which I didn't quite get. And then my question was mostly the position paper that has been prepared. What does it intend to achieve, if I can put it this way? Thank you.
Yeah. I think I mentioned several types of concerns that are raised in the realm of ethics reviews outside the biomedical sector. And what we wanted to state is, first of all, that the community of the research ethics committees in the biomedical sector is ready to support this movement, that also other type of ethics reviews should take place, that we are ready to include also other ethics committees. We need to reconstruct in a way UREC, because first of all, our statute says we deal with health research and biomedical research, so we need to be broader. and we have a kind of country representation in our association, and this would not work anymore like it does now, because the representatives of medical ethics committees should not present the countries for the non-medical sector. But in the non-medical sector, it's very difficult to find country representatives as long there are not national ethics committees also, because they are differently organized in the member states. So this is a real challenge for EUREC from a structural point of view, and we also want to encourage the policymakers in the member states also to care for this issue, because we recognize in the history of EUREC that EUREC as a European organization encouraged also movements in the member states. So when we started in Italy, in Poland, in France and other countries, there were no national working parties for medical recs, but now there are also in Spain. So they started this movement then because we needed it for EUREC. Yeah? At least it is an incentive to do so. I mean, EUREC does not have a mandate to say what the member state should do, but we can encourage a debate on the European level. We encourage that with a debate on the European level, we can encourage also systems in the member states. And this is the idea of the position paper, to start with a movement.
Thank you very much, because I was very curious during the presentation on how this could evolve, and thank you for this. Has anyone any questions, or are you curious to ask for more? This is the moment to do so. I think you've been all extremely clear, and what I take from this today's session is although often we focus a lot on the new and on the differences that there is in the non-humanities section, it is, I think, the basis of how we can go forward is really discussing and reflecting where it's from, the reflections from the focus groups that Matt's introduced, whether from the experiences of privacy in research, from the surveys that Rock and his colleagues carried out, and from the experiences of EUREC. The discussion and sharing of experiences is central. We hope that today's event has helped also in this sharing of experiences, and I take this opportunity to thank again our speakers, Dirk, Matt, Esther, and Rock. Thank you for having been with us today, and all of you who have spent the afternoon with us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Be healthy.
Bye-bye.
Yes, definitely. Everyone, keep healthy.